we all know how much I love an event, don't we? And next thing that I've got popped up in my calendar this week is National Cream Tea Day. Are you cream or jam first?
I'm definitely cream first, then jam, 100%.
Interesting. What about you, producer Martin?
I would say I'll go jam first. This is presuming that we've got a bit of butter on the scone, not the scone, the scone. Pour that highlight scone.
Disagree with you on that. It's a scone.
Right. Well, you're scone from this podcast if you disagree with me any more times.
Hello and welcome to Agonomics with me, Tom Spencer.
And me, Charlotte Fawkes-Rees.
No Hannah this week. She's off doing some proper work for AHDB.
But fear not, you can still expect more of the same from this show, as Tom and I have a look at the stories behind the numbers from the world of farming.
I've been catching up with senior analyst Becky Smith to find out about average slaughter ages for prime cattle.
Over the last 10 years, we have seen the age at slaughter fall across both suckler beef and dairy beef. Suckler beef fall by about 3%, which works out at about 19 days, so 19 less days to finish on average. And for dairy beef, that's down 4%, so down 25 days.
I'll take you through my review of Easter 2025. Beef or lamb? I'll reveal which one was the winner with the big horseradish versus mint sauce clash.
And if you listened to last week's podcast, you might remember Hannah asking about how many Olympic-sized swimming pools of milk we produced last year. Well, I've done the maths and we'll give you the answer later in the show.
A reminder, new episodes of Agonomics drop at midday on Wednesdays. So follow us wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss a show.
And don't forget to get in touch. We always appreciate hearing from you.
Comment on any of AHDB's social channels or email agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. Well, Tom, considering that Hannah's not here this week, it actually looks like a pretty jam-packed show, doesn't it?
It does, to be fair. We've got lots to talk about, especially the news section. And coming up, we'll have, as mentioned earlier, an interview with Becky Smith, senior analyst in our red meat sector here at HDB.
Yeah, really looking forward to hearing about that, because we have seen that obviously beef has been seeing some quite interesting changes and challenges going on. So it'd be great to hear her insights.
But before we go to that, what have you been looking at in the news, Charlotte?
Yes, so interestingly, I saw pop up last week an article that was referencing how Australia has officially approved the sale of cultivated meat products, and that's manufactured by food technology firm VOW. So they have been looking at cultivating Japanese quail meats, and that's now going to be sold in venues across Australia. Now, why that's really interesting for us particularly is part of the Food Standards Agency's Sandbox programme, which was looking into informing how cultivated meat products could be or are regulated in the UK. VOW is actually one of the manufacturers that was included within this study. So it's particularly interesting to see, I think, looking forward, how this might be received by Australia, whether it is a product that they're looking at, and actually then potentially how this might then transfer across to us in the UK. How about you then, Tom? What have you been looking at this week?
So yes, the big news coming up in the week that we've just had, the spending review has had some further details announced. So here's what we've found out now. So you remember that in the 2024 autumn budget announced a sharper than planned reduction in direct payments for 2025, following the recent spending review on June the 11th. DEFRA has confirmed that these cuts will go even further in 2026 and 2027. AHDB has done some analysis and has broken that down into what that might mean. So for the first £30,000 of direct payments a farm receives will be reduced by 98%. Anything above that will be reduced by 100%. Now, our analyst in the economics department, Amandeep, has been comparing that for our virtual farms. There are sort of farms on a spreadsheet, so we can give examples of when impacts, especially policy changes, and what those mean for those farms. So we've got a 455 hectare arable farm that in 2020 was receiving £104,000 in direct payments. So for both years of 26 and 27, it will receive just £600. That's more than 99% drop. For a smaller farm, one of our farms is a dairy farm, 105 hectares. That would have received £23,000 in 2020. That's gone down to just £466. So these reductions were always meant to affect larger farms, more in absolute terms, which they still do. But let's be clear, all farms will feel this impact, especially with the acceleration in 2025 and now again through to 2027. Now, with the SFIs, the Sustainable Farming Incentive Schemes, currently paused, but a new version expected later this year. And with applications for the Countryside Stewardship higher tier due to open on an invite-only basis this summer, it is vitally important for farmers to plan ahead and explore the different income streams available to them to get the most out of their farm business. We'll continue to follow this closely and bring you updates as more detail comes out. But do please, if you're interested, visit the AHD website to read Amandeep's analysis. Charlotte, I hear you've been looking at some news on blue tongue. Is that right?
Yeah, so we had it announced last week that there were being additional restrictions placed on livestock moving from England to Wales. So from 1st of July, all cattle, sheep and goats being transported across the border will need to test negative for the disease before they can be moved into Wales. So this has come about because while there have been parts of England which have blue tongue, it has yet to reach Wales. So this policy has been put in place to try and hold back the virus from entering Wales. It isn't just Wales that has these restrictions, it's also going across for transporting these ruminants into Scotland as well. So AHDB is actually holding a webinar tonight, so that's Wednesday 25th of June. So if you're listening on the day of release, you can watch the webinar live. It's on from 5 till 6 p.m. Otherwise, if you aren't able to be there for the event, it will be recorded, so you can catch up with it on the AHDB website. But this webinar is really aimed to share the latest updates on the current blue tongue virus situation. And it is part of a series of webinars which we have been running just to make sure that we can share timely and accurate information to help you understand what the latest updates mean for the UK. We've also got further information to do with blue tongue, so whether this is looking at cost calculators for vaccinating sheep, cattle or dairy cattle, or finding out more about the blue tongue virus, you can visit the website ahdb.org.uk, or you can contact the AHDB blue tongue virus helpline, and that's on 0247 771 0386.
Talking about cattle, I've been speaking to our AHDB colleague Becky Smith about cattle age at slaughter, and I began by asking her about the trends and changes over the past few years.
If we start off by explaining the data that we use to create this analysis. So this data comes from BCMS, which is the British Cattle Movement Service, and includes data about registrations, populations of cattle and deaths. So obviously this will be based on that cattle deaths data. So when we look over the last 10 years, we have seen the age at slaughter for that prime-aged cattle fall across both suckler beef and dairy beef. So we've seen suckler beef fall by about 3%, which works out at about 19 days, so 19 less days to finish on average. And for dairy beef, that's down 4%, so down 25 days. That means the average days of slaughter for a suckler beef animal in 2024 was 659 days.
Are there differences in how long different types of cattle take to finish, like that suckler-bred versus dairy beef?
Yeah, so as you say, those suckler beef tend to finish faster. So in 2024, that's 659 days versus dairy beef, slightly longer. So in 2024, 695 days to finish. The other one that's interesting is when we add in those dairy males to the mix, so those dairy bull calves. On a longer term, we have seen those increase in days to slaughter, and I think we can kind of touch on why that is a little bit more. And they now sit between the two, so between suckler and dairy beef.
You mentioned in your article, I'd argue a key point of this is the average slaughter ages have gone up overall across all groups since 2021. What is influencing this?
So there's a few factors, I think, that are really building into this. And I think it's important to say, obviously, they have increased slightly in the last couple of years, but they are still below kind of historic levels. I guess one of the key drivers really is about that price point. So we've seen, historically very strong beef prices over the last few years, particularly in the last probably year or so. And that's really incentivising farmers to slightly increase those kill weights, keep animals on just a little bit longer, and kind of really maximise the potential there. So yeah, alongside that kind of changing of type, we also see changes in breed profiles. So we see increased proportion of natives in kills, like potentially slightly influencing that age at slaughter. And like I mentioned earlier, that change in makeup of dairy bull calves versus, for example, dairy beef or suckler calves. Again, all kind of building into that complex picture, all influencing age at slaughter.
Hi, I'm Tom Spencer, analyst at AHDB, and here's your latest look at the UK beef market for the week ending 7th of June 2025. Deadweight cattle prices continued to slide in early June. The all-prime average dropped by 13 pence to 651p per kilo, bringing prices close to where they were back in March. Prices eased across the board as the market adjusts after the sharp price rises earlier this year. That said, cattle supply remains tight, and that's likely to keep some upward pressure on prices in the longer term. For now, the big questions are around how consumers respond to price inflation in beef and what that means for import demand, especially with global market forces in play. Slaughter numbers picked up after the bank holiday, rising to 34,400 head, but they're still below last year. In fact, for the year so far, prime cattle throughput is down nearly 3%. As for cows, prices also dropped, down almost 14 pence to 517p per kilo, and numbers remain seasonally low. Although we usually see a lift in cow throughput as the year progresses, it looks like numbers will stay tight compared to 2024. For more insight and detailed analysis, head over to ahdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Welcome back to the Agonomics podcast with me, Charlotte, and Tom. Now, that was really interesting hearing from our senior analyst, Becky Smith, about what we've seen going on with the changes in age of cattle at slaughter.
Yeah, really interesting part was the increase in that age across all categories, referencing the strong cattle price for a reason to incentivise that increase in kill weights.
And that isn't necessarily something that I would have been expecting. I would think that people would be sending forward their animals a bit sooner, making the most of that price and going, well, is it better in my pocket than perhaps hanging around and the price changing when they are ready to send?
Yeah, touching on that, I think with the feed price not being anywhere near what it has been over the past few years, it's almost incentivizing those farmers to add a bit of feed to the mix, keep the animal on farm for a bit longer, and make the most of those really decent prices. Speaking of beef, Charlotte, and your love of a seasonal event, I think you've got some research for us, tying those two things perfectly together.
Yeah, now it may feel like a little time ago, but think back to Easter. Question for the floor will be, do you celebrate Easter, you guys? Do you like a little Easter egg hunt, or are you more of a just hand you across a cream egg and wish you happy Easter?
I'm definitely someone who looks forward to going home and finding that the Easter bunny has arrived, even if my mum has texted me which chocolate bar is my favourite of the year. But the most important thing is, for me, always a lovely roast lamb.
Oh, interesting. What about you, Martin? Do you dress up as the Easter bunny and hide eggs around the garden for your kids?
I did hide eggs last year, but I don't think I did this year. I can't remember whether it was just because of inclement weather or just because I really couldn't be bothered to do that at about 9 o'clock the night before. But I polished off the last of the kids' Easter eggs earlier this month. There was a whisper one that just kept talking to me.
We always had a rule when we were growing up that if you haven't eaten your Easter eggs by the time the Easter holidays are over and you go back to school, it's a free-for-all. If it's in the fridge, anyone can have it, which normally meant that Dad cashed in big time.
So that means that both of you fell into the 70% of shoppers who celebrated Easter this year. Now, actually, that was slightly up on the 58% that had been asked earlier in the year if they'd been planning on celebrating. So most people were looking to enjoy this early spring holiday, although it did fall quite late this year, didn't it? And we did see that there was a slight impact on what people were buying. So as you mentioned, Tom, lamb is hugely important for Easter. It is very synonymous, is the word that we like to band around, but if meaning really, if you think of Easter, not only do you think of your little chicks, your bunnies, but you think of that nice leg of roast lamb on the table, don't you? But because it fell so late this year and the weather was so lovely, wasn't it? I mean, I did get sunburnt in the garden. It wasn't just the leg of lamb that was doing well, but beef had a great Easter too. So not just in your roasting joints, because we did see that there was an increase in purchases of beef roasting. So that was actually up 13 or more than 13% year on year. But beef burgers, people were out and barbecuing. Now, you mentioned you like your leg of lamb, Tom. Did you go for the traditional roast this year?
We did, definitely. But that's not to say that we didn't also go to the garden and do exactly that and have a barbecue. However, our family kept it a bit more traditional and there were lamb chops. So it was a double lamb event for us.
Oh, lovely. What about you, Martin?
I think it was a spag bowl.
So you only celebrated with the eggs.
That was it, yes. It was, there you go, there's the Easter eggs. Let's just crack on with some normal meals.
I mean, I am very much not on brand at all. I had pizzas in the garden. We got the pizza oven going and made the most of that sunshine. But it just shows you, doesn't it, that what an impact weather can have on what people are eating. Only one of the three of us had that traditional roast. And that is what potentially was having an impact on some of the performance of the cuts that we were seeing. So lamb, it had an absolutely stellar year last year. We talked about it last week, didn't we, a little bit when we were talking about seasonal events. And actually, while this year it did account for almost 51% of primary red meat roasting joints sold in that 2-week period to Easter, it did actually underperform compared to last year's incredible results. So if we compare it to Easter 2024, it actually saw an almost 8% decline year on year. Now, while that might sound quite concerning, what I would like to sort of caveat that actually Easter 2025 performance was significantly stronger than Easter 21, 22 and 23. So particularly if we look at how lamb roasting joints performed in Easter 2022, we were 40% higher in volumes being purchased this year. So it sounds like perhaps it didn't have a great year compared to 2024, but lamb still performed really strongly. And we do know that it is really important. Consumers do see it as a protein that they prefer having in this spring holiday. And we see that its share of meat, fish and poultry volumes increase. So it's almost 3 times higher during Easter compared with the rest of the year.
On that subject, Charlotte, I'm one, when I do get the barbecue out in those hot weathers, I do like to go to the butcher to get a big pack of meat so I can entertain loads of guests. What do we see when we're looking at where people are buying their meat?
I'm going to say that is the best answer you could give me, Tom. I am married to a butcher, so anyone that's supporting a butcher is very, very well appreciated in my books. But we did actually see that supermarkets were dominating, particularly when it came to roasting joint sales this year. So they actually accounted for 3/4 of these purchases. Now, we've all seen that promotions have been really strong, haven't they? And some of that will have been tempting shoppers to go to a supermarket, perhaps then go to these more traditional retailers for their purchases. And we did actually see that butchers had almost a 25% decline in volumes being purchased from them for those roasting joints, and they actually decreased their market share to just 2%. So this is something that AHDB has been looking at. And actually, I recently conducted some research which was looking at how we could improve something that we call purchase intent. So how likely are people going to be to go and buy something from butchers? So I know this is something that we are hopefully going to be covering in a couple of weeks on the show. So if this is something that you're interested in, it'll be one to look out for.
Perfect. So on that note, it's time to take a short break. And when we do rejoin you, we'll be answering not one, but two questions.
Ooh.
If you're looking to bring new talent into your business, then the Pig Industry Scholarship Programme could be for you. Known as PISP, the initiative developed by AHDB, the National Pig Association and Harper Adams University recruits highly qualified agriculture students into the pig industry and associated trade. It's a fantastic way for farm businesses to gain staff and help train the next generation by offering valuable hands-on 12-month work placements. The deadline to express your interest for the 2026-27 academic year is Monday the 2nd of September. For more, visit ahdb.org.uk and search for Pig Industry Scholarship.
Welcome back to the Agronomics podcast with me, Charlotte, and Tom. So just a quick reminder, if you love hearing about the economics of agriculture, remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you may listen. Now, I just wanted to take you back to last week, Tom, as we left our talk about dairy on a little bit of a cliffhanger.
Our yields up 5.2% compared to last year. That's a whopping 1,186 million litres in May.
How many swimming pools is that?
A fair few, I think.
That's the standard question, isn't it? How many Olympic-sized swimming pools of milk did we produce last year?
See, even though Hannah is not currently here today, she's still featuring, so that's always good to see. So just to recap, that was 1,186 million litres of milk in May. Now, what does that mean for an Olympic swimming pool? So I want you to picture it. You've got Rebecca Adlington diving into the pool to start her long race. So an Olympic swimming pool is 50 metres long, 25 metres wide and 2 metres deep. So pretty substantial. And that equates in May to 474 Olympic swimming pools. You might be thinking, oh, I thought that might be even more than that. Well, that equates to, in agricultural terms, almost 60 hectares of swimming pool, which, I don't know about you, is huge.
That's a big swimming pool if you were going to put them all together, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's more than just one field. That is several. Now picture what that would be like for the whole year. So for the 24-25 milk season, which runs from April to March, that was 12.44 billion litres of milk produced in GB. Now that equates to almost 5,000 Olympic swimming pools. And I put that into agricultural terms again, 622 hectares, which is over 1,500 acres. Which, if you put into the average size of a farm in the UK, just to give you a little extra one, average size of a farm is 88 hectares. So you're looking at 7 farms of 2 metres deep pools of milk.
Well, I don't even know what to say on that, apart from, I don't know I'd fancy swimming in it, because I would definitely be thinking there would be a shark in there that I could not see. Although it might get me swimming a bit quicker.
Yes, on to our second question of the week. Martin, what do you have for us today?
Well, before I give you that, your fear of swimming in a swimming pool of milk reminds me of one of those dad jokes. What's yellow and scary?
Oh, God, I don't know.
Shark-infested custard.
Right, the serious question then. I've always wanted to know why economic reports talk about real terms changes.
Yes, a really interesting question and very topical when we're talking about the agricultural budget that has been set for DEFRA and come the spending review. So Firstly, what is the difference between the word we use is nominal value and the real terms value. So the nominal is simply what is the stated value of said budget or said product, whether it be a loaf of bread that costs £1, the nominal value in a year's time, if take inflation, will still be £1 if it hasn't increased, whereas the real term value of that bread takes into account the inflation, which CPIH, which is the consumer price inflation, which includes household rent, is currently at the time of recording at 4%. So that would mean that the value of that bread, if it hasn't changed from that £1, has actually reduced in real terms. So when we look at the agricultural budget, for example, and you see the spending for each sector of the government, although it might seem like there has been just over a 2% increase in the budget for DEFRA going forward to 2029-30, when we equate that, taking into account inflation, actually, it will have needed to increase by, if it was a 3-year period, for example, it will have needed to increase by 12% to be the same value as it was today. So a very important stat to include. Also, in particular, when the consumer is looking at budgeting when they are going to the supermarket, when they see that prices are inflating, it may be that everything else around them is also increasing, meaning that those real and nominal values do come into account.
It will go back to when we were talking about consumer confidence a little bit last week, whereby if they may have had wage increases, actually have these kept up with how fast price has gone up for certain products? And in some instances, no, we haven't seen some of these 10, 12, 15% increases in wages, which would have matched some of the price increases we had been seeing on certain grocery products last year. So it's just putting that into context, isn't it? That while inflation is easing on what it has been, that is definitely having an impact then on actually how much available money anyone may have. So whether that's in their own pocket or in a spending review or budget that's been announced by government.
Absolutely. And when we put this into an agricultural term, this is something that the AHDB reports on. I believe it will be coming out shortly in the coming weeks. We look at what's called API, Agricultural Price Index. So that's looking at the input values in agriculture and how those have increased or in some cases come down over a period of a year or between months, and how those are affecting farming and what may be the causes of those, to sort of help farmers track where they are in terms of their input prices and give a bit more sense of, are they getting a good value for their input costs, and being able to put those against their revenue. So very important when we look at those real terms versus nominal, especially looking at those input prices. We've already seen some reaction from the fertilizer price from conflicts in the Middle East. So those will be hot on the cereals and oilseeds side of AHDB with their Grain Market Daily, looking at how that has impacted things, and to look at what the fertilizer price has done in response to that, with crude oil increasing in price, which is heavily linked to the gas price, which then leads you to where fertilizer prices may be going. So something to really look towards and a watch point moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. Watch this space. Certainly something that AHDB is going to be looking at, because it is going to be impacting our levy payers.
So to wrap up, we've covered a lot, even without Hannah, but I'm sure she will be back next week. We started off by looking at cultivated meat in Australia and what that might look like if it was to be seen by the UK consumer. We looked at the spending review, didn't we? And we had some update on blue tongue news from you, Charlotte.
It was great to hear from Becky on some of the analysis that she's been conducting, looking at cattle slaughter ages, and that gave me a great chance to talk about one of my favourite things, a seasonal event, and how Easter was for this year.
And hopefully you're still imagining those Olympic-sized swimming pools full of milk, full to the brim, with Rebecca Adlington and Michael Phelps having a bit of a dive. Don't forget to subscribe to the Agonomics podcast
We love to hear from our listeners, so make sure to drop us an email. So that's to agonomics@ahdb.org.uk, or leave us a comment or a review wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. And be sure to drop us a note letting us know whether it's scone or scone, and whether it should be cream or jam first. We'd love to hear from you.
Definitely scone.
Speak to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.